will there be a sharp plunge in prices, right? For those waiting to enter the market, right, that's the question you have in mind. Because if there's going to be a sharp plunge in the market, should I wait for that plunge to happen and then come in and scoop something up at fire sale prices, right? For sellers, you might be thinking, oh, if a sharp plunge is going to come, should I exit now versus a time where the prices drop, right? Or especially if, based on the article, it's going to drop and last out for a couple of quarters. So, as usual, before we get into the topic at hand, we like to start off with some of the recent news. And I guess the most recent, or perhaps a very recurring topic, not just in the property market, but in the whole economy, right? Generally, it's the fear or the likelihood of an upcoming recession. Okay, and how are we going to tackle it? How can we manage it? Right? What is its likely impact on the property market? So we've been seeing on and off, right, newspaper articles. Either it's articles about rising interest rates, which we talked about in the previous live session, right? That snippet is out on our YouTube channel. You can go there and take a look, right? I split out what rising interest rates mean for the market and what rising interest rate mean for you. And in today's session, right, we are talking about recessions, right? What the likely recession, right? I guess it's pretty much already accepted, right? I mean, because the fact is that recessions, by the time the news come out that you are in recession, you are already in a recession because it is something that's retrospective, right? 2 quarters of consecutive negative GDP growth. So in likelihood, we are already in a recession. We're going to know the news in a couple of days, right? On 1st July. Right, but okay, right, that being said, right, what is the likely impact of that recession on the market today? And if we read this article, right, of which I'm going to put that link into the descriptions. You can go and take a look at this article. Came out on the 27th of June, earlier this week on Monday. Pretty scary headlines, right? Shocks to property sector usually stretch beyond the recessions. Okay, I'm not going to go through the entire article, right? Picked up some of the salient points and also put in perhaps the most the table that illustrates basically what the entire article wanted to say, right? So they tracked 5 previous recessions, right? The 1985 recession, 1997 Asian financial crisis, 2001 dot-com bust, 2008 global financial crisis, and the 2020 COVID recession. Okay, so right, they range from 2 quarters to 3 quarters, right? And what is the thing that they wanted to share or wanted to highlight really? It's the 35.8% decrease in price, 44.9% decrease in price, 44.9% decrease in price, 20% decrease, 24.9% decrease over 9 quarters, 10 quarters, 15 and 4 quarters, right? Basically longer than the actual recession. And so based on the past data, that is what it shows, which is pretty scary for all of us, because that probably means even if this is a short soft landing, a short recession, does it mean that the market is going to go into 15 quarters is a good close to 4 years of decline in the market? Pretty scary. So what do I think, right? What does the data show? Of course, right, this is accurate data, right? It's obviously not wrong, right? But you know, pulling from 1985 to 2009, we know many things have changed. What has changed? Okay, so will we likely go to closer towards the COVID pandemic recession, right, whereby it was just a 1/4 decline of 1%, or closer to the 2000s dot-com bust recession, causing close to a 4-year decline in property prices. So which one will we be likely going towards? Okay. So some of the other points highlighted in the article, right, is such as the effects of the recession is amplified due to leverage and sentiment. So this is one of the sentences that I picked out, and I guess that's very, very true. Okay, so essentially, the higher the leverage, right, the harder the impact once a recession hits, because all that leverage gets sucked out from the market. Demand collapses, sentiments get very, very fearful, and so that causes and that takes a long time for the market to recover, because first of all, people that lose their jobs got to find back their jobs, earn back the money, save the money, then they will start to think about buying properties again, right? Hence the in the 2000s that was something that has happened. Another point in the article that has also been stated is that there are also some seismic changes with regards to the property market. So in 2001, what was highlighted was also that it was during that period where the government actually came in to come up with quite a fair bit of cooling measures to cool the market, because if you have seen, right, the increase in home prices, what wasn't indicated here, right, is that the period before the dot-com bust, property prices have shot up significantly, causing the government to come in and implement a lot of cooling measures. So there was quite a bit of a seismic change in the market in the early 2000s as well. Right. So some of the suggestions that the authors or the author said is to refrain from over leverage and have sufficient funds to last yourself 1 year. And we don't need for a recession to be coming for us to really use that as a word of advice. It's an advice that we've been sharing with our viewers, our clients for many, many years already. Doesn't matter recession or not, yeah? Right, next up. I think, right, this whole recession thing or not, happen, don't happen, right? I think to really condense that whole discussion really comes down to will there be a sharp plunge in prices, right? For those waiting to enter the market, right, that's the question you have in mind. Because if there's going to be a sharp plunge in the market, should I wait for that plunge to happen and then come in and scoop something up at fire sale prices, right? For sellers, you might be thinking, oh, if a sharp plunge is going to come, should I exit now versus a time where the prices drop, right? Or especially if, based on the article, it's going to drop and last out for a couple of quarters. And as usual, we try to break it down into bite-sized, easy to understand bits, right? So that while we are very, very detailed in terms of the data, I try my best to explain it in an easy to understand manner. So how I've broken it down is, as usual, into demand and supply, right? On the demand side, right, whether or not, or how does the speculative demand measure up today as compared to the years of the past, okay? How does foreigner demand compare today versus the past, right? Foreigner local demand. What's that percentage and how does it compare to the past? And did that contribute to some large spikes and drops in prices in the past, okay? As well as upgraded demand. And then we're going to take a look at, on the supply side, what's the unsold inventory, what's the inventory trends, and where are we headed towards, okay? So what does a recession mean for you? Okay, so this particular data, I picked it up from this article over here written by Hutton's research. I'm going to put that link also into the description for you guys. You can go there and take a look. It's I would say it's a counterbalance article to that earlier article lah. And in it, he states several reasons why he doesn't feel that the market is going to enter into a prolonged decrease in prices, okay? So one of the data that he put out, which I picked up, and I feel is extremely relevant for, you know, all of us to understand. In 1995, right, the speculative demand constituted 31.1% of the market, right? So 1 out of every 3 transactions was speculative in nature. What does speculation or speculative demand mean, right? Is that, you know, people are just buying without the intention of staying in it. Not just that, right? Why is it called speculative and not investment? Because they look to flip it quickly for a profit, right? So for those of you who follow us, or I mean for most of you know, that is something that's no longer possible today. Do you know last time, right, you buy a property, you don't even need to pay the stamp duties immediately, right? Today, after you exercise a property, you got to pay it within 14 days. Last time, you have quite a fair bit of time to pay it, which allowed for this huge market of people buying, basically putting money to secure an option, right? An option to purchase, and then selling that option to purchase to someone else at a higher price, basically at zero cost, right? They don't even have to pay stamp duty, right? And so that was what created in, you know, I use this analogy of this very frothy beer, okay? Because speculative demand, really, the whole analogy is a pint of beer with a lot of bubbles, right? That bubble constitutes the speculative demand. So 1/3 of the glass is bubbles. So what happens when the bubbles disappear? The actual level drops down to where the alcohol is or the liquid is. And so with a lot of speculative demand, we see huge spikes and drops in prices. Later on, I'm going to show you a graph to illustrate that. But actually, you don't even need that graph. You see in orange for your ease of reference, right? It resulted in, because 1995 so the 1997 and 1998 recession, right? The price drop was 44.9%. Why? Because one out of every 3 transactions in the market was speculative, and speculative demand is wiped out from the market, or is very, very fast or very, very quick to be eliminated the minute fear sets in, right? Because a guy comes in, he buys a property, just puts down a 1% to secure a option, and then flip it out to people. So what's going to happen if a recession hits? He's just going to forgo that 1%. So a lot of that transactional prices that you see in the market is not built on solid foundation. So very, very quickly, all that prices are going to fall once all these speculative flipping transactions end. Okay? Fast forward to today, 2021. Okay? Speculative demand only takes up, and I'm even surprised that there is still like 2.6% of speculative demand, because it's so hard to flip properties nowadays. These 2.6% of transactions are paying the 12% seller stamp duty. So I have absolutely no idea how anyone's making money out of speculating the property market right today. So the analogy is this beer, this glass of beer that has very little froth on it. So, you know, be it the beer hot or cold, the level is already there. It's not artificially being increased or elevated because of all the froth. Okay? And so with that, with 2.6% speculative demand or speculation in the market, it has resulted in prices only dropping, right, 1% in the previous recession, right, the COVID-driven, the pandemic-driven recession. Okay, this is just one of the figures. Next up, right, so in that particular article, the one that I sent, right, done by Hutton's research, out of the last 5 recessions, he counted, I believe, 4, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Actually, all 5 recessions, the market actually rebounded sharply after. And out of the 5, only 2 of the only 2 of the recessions resulted in a more prolonged recovery in prices, and that is in the 2009 one you see over here. The prices took quite a while to recover. The rest rebounded in a sharp and swift manner. 1, 2, 3, 4. Only 2 took a slightly longer time to recover over here. Okay? So what is the next thing that we want to take a look at is how did the government eliminate all this speculative demand? In that period where the speculative demand took up 1 out of every 3 transactions in the market, why is it so? You could take 90% leverage. So with $1 million, you can buy 10 properties, right? Because all you need to do is to put a $100,000 down payment for one, because you can take a 90% loan, buy a second one. Why? And also a $100,000 option fee will do, down payment will do, is because there's no ABSD then. So you can rinse and repeat this for 10 properties. And what that means when interest rates actually come up, number one, now you're servicing, because you're servicing 10 mortgages, you're essentially servicing a $9 million mortgage. That increase in interest rate is going to hit you. Okay, next up. Because you only have so little skin in the game, it's very easy for you, if fear sets in, interest rate comes up, to simply stop paying the mortgage and allow the bank to repossess the thing, right? You probably will not let them repossess your own home, the one that you stay in, but the rest of them you just let it repossess, especially if prices correct 40%, because you only have 10% in equity in that particular property. Now that property has plunged 40% if we see the previous data, right? What would you do? I mean, likelihood you wouldn't go and make the margin call of 30%, you just let the bank repossess the thing lah. Yeah? So all of that, we can no longer do it today. Right? Similarly, the seller stamp duty is perhaps the strongest curb for speculative transactions and speculative demand, is because today, the minute you buy, you are forced to hold on to the not essentially forced, because if you want to sell it the next day, you have to pay a 12% additional buyer stamp duty, seller stamp duty. So the buyer has to pay you in excess of 12% for you to churn a profit from there. And which is why it's now only taking up 2.6% of the market lah. Okay, so pre and post 2013, which is why I like to say 2013 is really the year that the property market took a 180-degree change, right? So anyone that is utilizing the kind of strategies, the kind of thinking pre-2013, what worked pre-2013 is not going to work, or is also likely not going to happen post-2013, right? Because of the amount of cooling measures in the market. This is the next chart. So in this one chart, it illustrates all the different, all the different cooling measures that have been put in the market since February 2010. Okay, right? SSD 1, 2, 3, right? They keep increasing it. LTV 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Right, to today 75%, is likely going to drop even more to 70%. They're going to just keep dropping it, because we've seen in some of the other developed markets whereby, especially I believe it's in Hong Kong, for purchases under a certain amount or above a certain amount, I can't remember it correctly, the LTV is at 50%. Right, so imagine buying a property and basically already paying off half of it. Yeah, we have SSD 1, 2, 3, ABSD. Right, it started with 3%, yeah, it started with 3% ABSD for foreigners and 0% ABSD for Singaporeans in December 2011, right? That obviously didn't work. The first one came in at 7% ABSD for Singaporeans. Remember, that was the time whereby everybody said, the government sure take this off one. Right, not only did they not take it off, they increased it to 12% and very quickly increased it to 17% today. So what does this mean for the market? I like to use this illustration of this guy that is wrapped up all in the bubble wrap. Every single cooling measure, it's one layer of bubble wrap around the guy, right? Today we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10 layers of bubble wrap. How do you see? So imagine if a deep recession actually hits the market. All right, what can the government do? Adjust one of the cooling measures to bring prices up. Okay, visualize this. Right, a deep recession hits the market. Last time, the government didn't really have a lot of these layers to peel off. Okay, which is why they had to resort to totally not selling land at some, or pushing out totally not selling land for a couple of years. That again then just results in a huge undersupply moving forward, resulting in huge spikes and troughs of supply lah. So they try not to do that. Now they have so many layers of cooling measures for demand side factors. So imagine this, right? A deep recession hits. The government goes out and say, okay, fine, guys, right? I know times are bad. You know, for the next 6 months, you get a discount of ABSD, right? I'm going to drop it down from 17% Great Singapore Sale down to 12%. What do you think is going to happen to the market? You know, personally, what I think they might do, it's to adjust the ABSD maybe for foreigners, right? Or adjust ABSD for certain areas in Singapore, maybe Sentosa, for example. Bring in all the hot money, get the foreigners to pay the stamp duties, and for the government to collect all that money. Once that money flows into the property market, it gets spread out because it gets paid to the developers, get paid to the builders, and sort of host up the entire market lah. So, you know, many levers that they can take. They can tweak to SSD 3 to 2 years, right? They have done many of these things before by implementing cooling measures and taking them off in times of need or in times whereby they need to support the prices, okay? And so all these cooling measures, I would say, have finally helped the government achieve their main objective. Because remember this, is it to the government's advantage to crash the market? The answer is no, right? Because there are obviously political implications involved if prices, right? If everyone's home prices were to tank, right? So it's definitely not their intention. Their intention is to make sure prices go up at a slow and steady manner, right? They hate to see huge increase and huge drops, right? Which we used to see, as you can see with this chart, right? Quarter-on-quarter percentage changes, right? We have like 15% quarter-on-quarter percentage change. Obviously, if you can have 10% increases, you're going to have like 15% decreases and then 15% increases. At the end of the day, not healthy for the market, right? This one is like people's heart rate. The heart rate go up, go down, go down, then later no more heart rate. People jump off buildings and things like that. That's something that the government tried to avoid. And so once you see once post 2013, that fluctuation, that quarter-on-quarter change, yes, while everyone's complaining that the prices are going up non-stop, right? Is it like how it used to go up? The answer is no, right? It's going up at a slower percentage than it used to last time. So without that huge spike and huge drop, without that huge spike, do you think there's going to be a huge drop? I don't think so, okay? So next up, right, so speculative demand, right? You can see the fact that speculative demand has been removed from the market because of all the cooling measures. Huge increases and decreases in prices have been removed from the market, right? We have seen in the first example, post-2013, the first recession post-2013, right? The pandemic-related recession, the prices didn't correct by much, right? Didn't shoot up as much and also didn't plunge as much, just 1% down for 1 quarter. Okay, and the government, remember, and the government didn't even have to remove any cooling measures for that to happen. So what does that tell you about the market, right? Personally, how I see it is built on a lot stronger fundamentals today as compared to the past. using one of these data as well, this particular one, foreigner versus local demand. If you can see in 2010, right, the chart 2010, the Singaporeans took up about 70%, dropping all the way down to close to slightly above 60% of the market pre-2013. So what that means is the market pre-2013 was made up 40% of PR foreigners companies. Yeah, and all these people, they at the end of the day have the choice to leave Singapore and to pull their money away from Singapore. Okay, and remember at that time the PRs they buy, they also don't need any ABSD. They also don't need they don't need any ABSD. The minute they get their PR, they can buy. As a foreigner, also can buy, pay a little bit of extra stamp duty. And so, if you have seen all the previous examples of all the previous case studies, the condos that have the highest amount of foreigner PR ownership are also the condos that have the highest number of unprofitable transactions. So what does that tell me? Right. So foreign demand is, to me, sort of a double-edged sword. Good because they come in, they pay a lot of ABSD lah. So you know your neighbor pay a lot of ABSD for basically your same unit. You have a good buffer price. And also they pay all the ABSD that supplements the government's income and everything, so that we all have all the kind of healthcare benefits that we enjoy. But on the other hand, right, because they are so mobile and because they are likely to be more educated, high net worth sort of people, they have the choice to really shift their funds as and when they wish, right? Take for example, I remember a couple of years back, there was this example of a Malaysian businessman that bought, I believe was 2 units at Marina Bay Residences or the sale, right? It was a downtown condominium. While on paper, he sold it at a $2 million loss because the ringgit went from 1:2 to 1:3. When he converted the Sing dollar back into ringgit, he actually turned a profit. So to that guy, he's so happy, right? He turned a profit. He basically hedged against the devaluation of the ringgit. But over here, the neighbors are all left reeling because there's this guy that just fire sold his unit. Right? So that's just sort of an illustration of what things used to be like. In today's market, right, you see this line going up, Singaporeans coming up today, forming close to 80% of all transactions in the market, right? And so Singaporeans have a higher vested interest. There's also a higher chance that they're buying it for own stay. Even if it's for investment, there's a pretty good chance it's their one and only other investment property, okay? So also what that tells me is the likelihood of people doing a fire sale or just shifting their funds elsewhere, the chances are lower today compared to the past, okay? Next up, right, we also got to consider upgraded demand. I go down to the detail of seeing what actually was the demand in the past, right? So remember 2011, right, where the government lost their first GRC, right? So, right, this my channel is not politics, but you know, just to help you understand things better, right? Remember a lot of unhappiness was because at that point in time, people cannot seem to get new homes. They cannot seem to get new HDBs. At that point in time, the COV, yes, there's COV today, but remember the COV of the past is like, you know, the 100K COV was the norm. People came into the HDB transaction. I mean, for those that is 45 and above, I know, because I look at the data very little. So most of you actually don't know or don't remember that. Last time, right, when people want to sell their HDB, they already have done the valuations. So the sellers do their valuations and they put their price out there based on how much COV they are looking for, 50,000 or 100,000, right? And that made it very, very hard for young couples to buy because they then have to compete with baby boomers, upgraders, people that have made money from the BTOs of the past. So, you know, it's going to be very, very hard for a first-timer to buy. Cannot buy a new BTO. resale market also cannot buy, resulted in a lot of unhappiness. The data shows, right? Because look at that, in 2013, there was only 1,700 BTOs that hit their MOP. 1,700, right? I like to look at BTO MOP charts. Basically, it tells me the kind of upgrader demand, right? While not all MOP folks eventually upgrade, but a good number of them, at least I feel and this is not backed by anything, but based on how I see it. If you just go and look at the transactions for every block, usually a block maybe 100 unit every time based on once hit MOP, at least you're going to see 10 transactions come up, 10, 15, 20 transactions come up. So, based on that number, about 10 to 20% of them will upgrade. And so, imagine, look at this, in 10 or 20% people upgrade from 1,700 units. There's going to be just very little demand into the private market. So all the private market, that time you see volumes being very, very high, right? All that is all speculative. All that is all investment or foreigner driven. Very, very little upgrader own stay driven. Make sense? Okay. So versus fast forward to today, okay, right? HDB ramped up their supply of BTOs, and so now today we are having on average about 15,000 MOP units every year. Yeah. In 2022, we're going to have 30,000. That's going to adjust back down next year to 15,000. But it's going to hover around 15 to 17,000 for the foreseeable future, all the way to 2030. Right? In 2030, it's going to spike up again because late last year, the government pumped up more to sort of compensate for the lack of launches over the last 2 years. So we're going to see an average of about 17,000 MOPs on average per year. Compare that to 2013, the times where prices went up and down a lot. Yeah, remember? Because on very shaky demand, not strong demand, not organic, own stay Singaporean demand. Yeah. So today, 17,000, or 1,000, 100 times more, 100 times more demand. Okay. Next up, right? So that's going to be on the demand side. Now we are taking a look at the supply side. So the market today is going to enter into what I call, right? So a lot of, it's now already known now, but I've been talking about this potential undersupply, if you have been following the channel for, I believe, a good 1 to 1.5 years now already. I was starting to talk about it right then during the circuit breaker period. Right? It's only recently that you are starting to hear a lot more of the market talking about this undersupply. And I am of the belief that the government is actually allowing the market to go into a period of long-term undersupply. So why? Okay, hear me out, right? Cause the undersupply, right? So of course, all this supply. So maybe let me explain a little bit, right? Private supply comes in two manners. Private land supply comes in two manners. Number one, government land sale, and number two, en bloc. Right? So government land sale is the chart above. Right? It charts the amount of government land sales. Notice also in the past, right? 2009, 2011, 2012, how the numbers were quite high. And that has tapered off into somewhat more conservative numbers after 2015. Okay, even during that period of high supply, higher en bloc supply, they actually have kept the numbers pretty low compared to the past. And if you look at the previous chart, that is lower supply for higher upgrader demand. Yeah, you see the link? Lower supply on higher upgrader demand, which today is translating to the kind of, increase in prices that we are looking at. Is that speculative increase? The answer is no. These are all on solid local upgrader own stay demand. Okay? So government land sales, quite little, right, as compared to the past. Even en bloc, right, we have seen numbers basically tapering off to zero post 2018 because of all the cooling measures. Because if you feel the cooling measures are painful, the developers feel it double, triple, quadruple as hard, because for them today it's 35% ABSD if they cannot sell, 5% non-remissible. Last time, before 2018, it is still remissible as long as they can sell finish the property within 5 years. They don't have to pay any ABSD. Today, regardless, 5 ABSD upfront pay first. Yeah? So now, moving on to what I mean by the government is happy to allow the market to enter into a period of prolonged undersupply, is because the new launch supply coming into the market will tend to lead to a spike in prices. We all know that, because they have to, first of all, the government have to sell the land more expensive, because Singapore land is linked to the reserves, so they cannot sell it too cheap, right? It's valued by the chief valuer before they can put it out onto the market, and then they set a reserve price. So they can't sell for the land for too cheap. Yeah, so it'll always be more expensive. And where was I? Suddenly lost my train of thought. Have to sell more, have to sell more expensive, which then translate into higher prices. And especially today, where construction costs, inflation, everything, land costs already so high, you add on elevated prices, that's going to cost very, very expensive prices. We are seeing it already. We are seeing it $2,100 in Ang Mo Kio. Okay? So does the government see it as a good thing if we're going to have a lot of supply coming up at that kind of prices? I think not, right? While they still launch GLS, I think they have to. Are they launching it in the kind of numbers that we used to see? The answer is no, right? So where is all that demand gonna go? Into the resale market. And since the demand flow into the resale market, is that acceptable to the government? I think so, right? Because the resale market prices are controlled by valuations, or in other words, controlled by the financial institutions, the banks. Yeah, so they are the one determining the prices, and for them, they tend to like to be a little bit more conservative. So understand this, I didn't say the sellers. So while in the sellers market, like where it is today, right, the sellers can demand for the prices, the banks will set valuations at this range. Then they tend to buyers tend to then negotiate, sellers be more reasonable and adjust it down. But again, who actually is the one holding the prices in the resale market is actually the banks, the financial institutions, the people that are setting the valuations. But for in the new launch market, the banks tend to just allow the developers to sort of dictate what kind of prices they want to sell at. So it's the developers that dictate the prices in the new launch markets, and developers, profit-driven, tend to push the price high. Banks, financial institutions in the resale market, they want to be more conservative, so they try to hold prices lower. So demand flowing over there, prices being led by the resale market, the government isn't overly concerned because it's not going to spike like crazy, spike very, very quickly, yeah, because of what I have just explained. Okay, so all in all, government is comfortable for the market to go into a period of sustained oversupply. And also, even one step deeper, right? The last time they allowed that to happen, the developers came in aggressively and beat up the en bloc market, as we can see over here. So now the government is more clever this time around. They know the developers are starting to come in. They know the developers will come in. So what they did, preemptively, December 2021, they came in to increase the developer ABSD preemptively, basically warning the developers of doing another en bloc rush like last time. What they want to do, they want the manpower or the building supplies to go towards building out the HDBs first. They don't want the developers to suck up all the manpower and all the construction supply. All in all, for sort of a more sustainable good for the market. Yeah, I know it's quite deep. You might be already having a headache. So let's move on from this, okay? So in summary, right, where do I see the market headed towards, or how do I feel the market is going to react to the likely recession? Look at demand and supply. Today, there's very little speculative demand left in the market. The demand is mainly made up of locals for own stay. Even if it's for investment, it's their one and only investment property. Yeah, the upgraded demand is expected to remain consistently high because those units, the owners already inside already. They are already serving their MOP. They are going to hit their MOP regardless of what happens. Okay? And over on the supply, right, we are experiencing a historically low private new launch supply. Right? The developers are also sitting on historically low unsold inventory. Yeah, so with this high demand, or at least, right, even if it's not high demand, strong organic demand, no froth, remember, right, with low supply, I don't see prices tanking significantly, right, even if a recession is to hit. Of course, I haven't even talked about other data such as the MAS Financial Stability Report on low leverage, on the kind of cash, right? I've highlighted that many times in the channel before. You can go and take a look at that, okay? So that is more of the fundamentals of the Singapore household balance sheet, right? Today I'm just talking about demand and supply. All in all, after seeing all this data, I'm of the opinion that even if a recession hits, right, what is likely going to happen, okay? Because the developers are sitting on such low inventory, I don't think they will reduce prices. What likely might happen is that the resale sellers will adjust their expectations, right? So what's happening today, give for example, one unit, the last transaction is at 1.5. Owners are out there in the market looking at 1.6, 1.7. If you go into a EC, right, MOP EC, last transacted 1.3, pretty good chance you're going to bump into the seller asking for 1.5, 1.6. Okay? For those of you who are experiencing this, right, put it down into the chat. Let me know if you are facing this problem. So that's so what's going to happen if a recession hits and then demand volumes start to contract, right? The sellers will then reduce their expectations. So maybe from last transaction 1.3, today ask 1.6, maybe adjust to 1.5. Okay, that will impact the property price index, because the property price index basically just charts in that month, in that quarter, what's the transaction. So if the last transactor is at hovering at 1.5, today is dropping to 1.4, yes, right, it's going to drop down. Okay, but you also will notice a pretty good chunk of listings being taken off the market, right? Because likelihood is, unless the owner is in an urgent state, which if you look at the financial stability report, there's not many owners that are extremely highly leveraged. It's already built into the system that they can't over leverage themselves. Okay, most of them will then just elect to put their upgrading plans on hold. We have seen this many times before. For example, in early 2020, when we went into lockdown, right, the listings just all got put off the market, volumes plunged, right? But for however little volumes that they did transact, yes, you're going to probably see prices dropping, but on very little transactions. So chances of you picking up a unit then is also very low, because by the time you see that the property price index dropped, again, it's retrospective. And not just retrospective 1 day, 2 days, retrospective 1 quarter. So remember the previous pandemic related drop, they say it's 1 quarter. The next quarter is spiked back up. So by the time you say, hey, last quarter property price index drop, oh, now is probably a good time you enter the market has already moved past you. Okay, so, and that's why I put this chart over here. You also notice every time the prices drop, price index drop, it relates usually to very low volumes, and especially in today's market, whereby I have illustrated most of the demand is taken up or made up by own stay locals, right, vested into Singapore. They won't sell at a cheap price. Okay, they might be selling at a cheaper price as compared to last quarter, but not at a cheaper price compared to what they bought at. Yeah. So this is something that I learned from all the finance YouTubers, right? And because everything is now dropping in the stock market, right? They always say when in doubt, zoom out. So this is the property price index from in the Singapore market from, I believe, it's 1960 something. The new highs always higher than the previous highs, right? Even the new lows, right, are higher than the previous lows, right? So what you need to do is just to make sure that you are not over leveraged, you have a well thought out plan, right? What you should do, don't over leverage, prepare sufficient reserve funds. Yeah, I would already suggest that you assume interest rates are going to go up to 3%. Right? You assume already, you already factored it into your calculation so that you will not be in a root shock. In this period of time, get educated. So watching our video, being here today, listening to us is a good start, because that will allow you, right? So what's happened in the market is it's going to just slow everything down, give you a chance to take action, get educated, spot opportunities and take action, which is something that I'm going to share later on in this video. Okay. Lastly, if you are electing to wait, right? I've said this quite a few times. Make sure you understand what are you waiting for. If you are waiting, if your job is not so stable, yes, fine, right? Wait it out, see what things will likely be. If you are in a very precarious position, if you are working in Tesla, for example, you probably will want to wait, yeah? But if you are in a comfortable position, right, your job is quite stable, you should not be waiting for prices to drop to enter into the market, because history has shown the market picks up quickly. History has shown if prices really are to drop, it's unlikely that you're going to find anything very, very high. Even for people like us, super duper hard to get, like, this kind of fire sale cases. They're bound to have. Whether or not you can find is another story altogether, okay?